Ensign, could you please activate the delta wave housing lubricator? Our nanowave propulsion generator is overheating, and the drive grease in the radial vacuum engine isn't operating at peak coefficient in order to gauss the tungsten ion crystal replacement core. Technobabble, a staple of the sci-fi genre. A piece of the genre that many people find annoying, while many others find it strangely endearing or entertaining, despite the fact that most people just hear the trumpet noise from Peanuts when they hear it. So then, what's the purpose of Technobabble? Have we moved past it? And is it ever still useful? This week, on Why Are You Talking About This? Nerd. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Way Tad Nerd. I'm your host, William, and I will be your guide through the babbling today. You need a babbler to guide you through the babble. But before we continue, I just want to thank you so much for listening. It means the world to me to have my voice blasting through your eardrums harder and faster than a zinc bubble portal slamming through your boron electroplasma drive shaft. Whatever the fuck that means to you. Also, get ready for that. That's going to happen a lot today. I'll just break into technobabble. So also, as far as announcements go, we only really have two. First, Happy Pride Month, everyone. I hope your month is amazing to all my fellow queers, and I highly suggest throwing your local homophobe into a well. No one will find them. You can do it. I won't tell anyone. The other announcement is that the shows have been doing a whole lot better, so I want to thank you for that. It's been really awesome and inspiring, and I hope to be able to one day turn this into a career. I mean, it genuinely is like one of my life goals and dreams to be able to have a career doing stuff like this. And doing this, making YouTube videos, I mean, really just having kind of like a content creator career would be amazing. But enough sappiness and me talk. Let's get to the show. Alright, so we might have an episode on the shorter side today, mostly because this isn't too much of a hard topic to understand or grasp, but it is important and interesting, so don't you fucking dare turn this off because you think it's optional. We're doing some hardcore show lore building this episode. You'll miss out on the story, and you will not receive a Last Time on Dragon Ball Z next episode. Anyways, so what exactly is Technobabble in the first place? Oh, also, this is going to include Magibabble, or Magibabble, which is just the fantasy magic version of the same thing. So whenever I say, something like science or technology, just substitute like magic, spiritualism. Anyways, Technobabble is a collection of nonsensical words and phrases full of buzzwords, esoteric language, technical jargon, and made-up terminology. It's meant to sound scientific, but is ultimately a meaningless word salad meant to confuse or convince the audience into assuming you know what you're talking about, even if you entirely misuse the word, concepts, or literally just looking them up for a joke, or literally just look them up for a joke in the introduction of your show. And this is mostly used whenever there's some like sci-fi shit going on, including in stories where there's weird tech, or in any show whenever there's a computer within 5,000 nautical miles of the main characters. And Technobabble is most popularly used to justify a deus ex machina, impossible technology, move the plot along, or to make a character sound smarter than the author can, which is usually how and when it gets abused. In particular, because genres like sci fi overuse it so much, which is what causes it to be parodied so heavily, because everyone knows about it and has some reaction to it. Meaning that if you turn up to 11 and shove your audience nose in it like you're abusing a dog, they'll understand immediately how stupid it is. Now, that's the simple definition, but there can be more to it, because Technobabble also sometimes contains actual jargon, and oftentimes this is entirely out of place or inaccessible to the audience, which basically makes it useless to tell us anything. I mean, for example, if you have a character that's an expert in FTL travel, talk about how it works by explaining how the generator causes fluctuations in the quantum state of matter on the ship, allowing it to transpose world lines by a certain number of localizations, as determined by the ship's calculations, to near instantly transport the ship to new spatial coordinates as though they'd always been there. That's really cool if you understand what any of that fucking means. Otherwise, it just sounds like word salad, even though someone who studied quantum mechanics could look at it and go, I mean, you're using those words, but no. Or if you're using words entirely wrong, like talking about how the gyroscopic electrotransistors inside someone's desktop computer in your sci fi story. Like, yes, those are all words, but those might as well be gibberish given the circumstances. If you're wondering what any of that means, gyroscopic is basically like maintaining your orientation. And a transistor is like a semiconductor that controls the amount of like current or voltage in a flow. So a gyroscopic electrotransistor, and one besides being redundant, would be something that controls gyroscopic forces, which is one, I don't think that's possible. Two, I don't think your desktop PC needs one of those. Um, but okay. Let's all be fair to sci-fi writers for a second. I mean, I am one, technically. So let's just remember to have some grace, okay? Technobabble exists because it's useful. Oftentimes, as writers and creators, we don't understand the things that make our sci-fi work. Because it's not our job to understand. I mean, think, if you pump gas for a living, do you need to understand the specific molecular process of gasoline combustion? If you work at a desk, do you need to understand how the motherboard of your computer operates? No, you just need to understand how to push the buttons, button pusher. We're the same way. I mean, we just press a lot of buttons. I mean, besides, let's be real here, science community. A lot of the shit that you study is obtuse as fuck. And hey, as a humanities person, I know your dirty little secret. You like it. It gets you horny and your genitals leak thinking about someone like me sitting in front of their computer crying as they fail to convert newtons of force into something that they can actually comprehend and use on a piece of paper. We, as humanities people, like it when people stumble across a literary analysis of Beloved and find out someone fucks a cow, and we're all supposed to pretend like that's a sane thing to speculate about the meaning of. So, of course, we're just going to make up technobabble. We're creatives, that's what we do. Make shit up. And is this a failing on our part? New paragraph for emphasis? No. This is a part of sci-fi and fiction, and has been for a long time. So long, in fact, that we actually won't be having a history section this week. But as creators, our upper limit is determined by our own creativity and not modern scientific limitations. Besides, oftentimes, what starts off as technobabble will eventually become part of the story's standard vocabulary. Like, say you're in a fantasy setting and you create a spell that requires you to say Eperbus, Ventius, Gucci Coochie. That is literally fucking babble. It's kinda Latin and a poorly conceived vagina joke. Now, the vagina is a joke, we stand pussy in this house, But if that spell does something like turn a human being inside out in the most disgusting way imaginable, then suddenly the moment someone says Epirbus, your entire audience clenches their butthole and has flashbacks to Wizard Nom over something effectively meaningless, which is power. So before we move on to the next part, let's ask ourselves, what does good and bad technobabble look like? Well, on the good side, Babel lets you tell a story with a highly advanced or vastly technologically different world using jargon that your audience will at the very least smile and nod along at worst. And at best, they'll understand the idea you're going for even if they know it's entirely impossible and shouldn't make any goddamn sense. But most of the time, as you describe what that means, they'll vaguely remember that it's important, and whenever you bring it up again, they'll recall that one time you told them what a dioxynucleon acidification ionizer does. But on the bad side, really shitty technobabble can come off as lazy, cheesy, and/or condescending, because it tells your audience that there's a good chance that you don't give enough of a shit to actually try to explain what's happening to them, i.e. lazy, or that you don't know what the fuck is happening either, and you really just wrote yourself into a corner and you're too lazy to go back and rewrite it. Or they could see it as you saying, hey, do you guys remember Star Trek? You like Star Trek, right? Oh, Star Wars, you like Star Wars, that's cool, right? And basically, you're just cementing that you're either trying to be cheesy or you are woefully unaware of how cheesy you are, which, as we discussed a while ago now, is called cringe. And third, it can come off as condescending as you throw big words at them until they shut the fuck up, turn their brains off, and let you do the storytelling because you're the almighty author. Or that you're hoping your audience believes that you know what you're saying just long enough for them to mistake you for being smart so that they think you know what any of those words mean while you make a character say them. Regardless, your audience is going to want to know how these things work. I mean, people are curious. And hopefully they're interested too. And usually they'll look for hints in the name, so it's important to work for good technobabble. It gives your audience a good idea of what they're up against and what the limits of this piece of technology are. It gives them something to be invested in and fleshes out the world a whole lot. So, with that, let's discuss where this is currently. Okay, so as of right this moment, probably as you're listening to this and I'm saying it in simultaneously the past and the future from when I'm writing it, technobabble is very, very tired and overused. Well, I'm not saying that is useless. Most audiences aren't all that interested in technobabble anymore, because they've been exposed to it story after story after story using it. And while sure, some of those stories might have cool hidden world building in there, it's not really worth the time it would take to actually discover. Because it's so commonly used, you'd basically be running through college courses to hunt down lore snippets that might not even exist. So at this point, unless it's comedically overdone, saying some shit like Deltonium containment gel will just make your audience go, oh, okay, I can just turn my brain off and not pay attention now. Which obviously is not what you're trying to do. However, also, technobabble for parody or comedy is equally played out. Because your audience has seen it before from all the painfully self-aware sci-fi that jumped on the trend about a decade after it was funny, and continued to do every couple of years. So nowadays you need to be careful how you use your technobabble because it's so worn out and played out. Like your mom. Or like your mom jokes, which are still only funny as memes. So if you choose to use technobabble, you need to make sure that you can do it right. Because most people don't even give a shit anymore. Or maybe there's something deeper to it. Let's discuss that. Now, like a lot of episodes we've done, there isn't some big bad evil thing that'll happen when you write this poorly. This isn't cringe or race coding or even like siege warfare or a kink. It's just a kind of fun and silly feature of sci-fi that gets misused all the fucking time. So let's just get that out of the way. But assuming that you still think it matters like I do, let's get into it. So Technobabble can really be divided into two prongs for this thing. The first prong treats Technobabble as a harmless and fun part of storytelling. Here, the biggest risk is that you come off as a cheesy goober that in serious stories can dissolve basically any trust the audience had in you to begin with, which is hopefully not what you're going for. But be careful, because even in less serious stories, using Technobabble without good reason can make your audience assume that you don't know a goddamn thing about what's going on. Like, sure, if you're doing, like, a Star Trek, you can make shit up that's corny and goofy, like ion destabilizer cannons. That's perfectly acceptable. No one's going to bat an eye at that. But when you start describing a microwave as a radioactive monoxide dihydride accelerator, people's faces go from laughing to serious faster than you starting a comment with, I like Asians, but... Which, none of that is where you want to be as an author. You still want to come off as having some authority, and also don't want your audience to entirely disown you. However, on the good side of this prong, Technobabble can make you come off as being very smart, or you end up doing a very good job of being very immersive. And that's awesome. Especially because if you do it ultra correctly, your audience's own knowledge can fill the gaps in even if you miss, or can help to excite some of their own curiosity. Or even if you hit, they can use like some of their own like out of story knowledge to like fill in gaps that you didn't even think about. But with the other prong, Technobabble is actually really important. Albeit in the English degree haven't asked looking too deeply into it sort of way, but it's sort of important. If you give your audience a stream of bullshit, but it's real jargon that's just wildly and massively misused, and they trust you that you're using these terms correctly, well then what are they going to do? That's right. They'll take it into their normal lives and carry that wrong definition or vague idea along with them. Which, sure, for the normal person, getting the idea of what quantum is wrong isn't going to matter a whole lot or make the world worse, but you did just willingly misinform someone. Which, if you didn't know, you should not be trying to do. On top of that, because they have this false idea, they might refuse to believe what it really is. Because best case scenario, they'll need to unlearn whatever bullshit you just taught them to learn the actual definition. Legwork that a lot of people just passively learning things don't want to tangle with. And worst case scenario, they assume that you know better than a literal fucking scientist and become a pissed off fanboy about it, and further fan the flames of anti-intellectualism we're basically constantly dealing with. And if you think that's an over-exaggeration, I want you to really think about it. You remember COVID, right? And how a lot of people refused to get vaccinated because they didn't believe a cure could come out so fast? Where do you think they got that idea from? Not believing science could move that fast and humanity can't cure things so quickly. And some amount of that is from, I shit you not, the cultural zeitgeist that zombie and pandemic movies and shows give us, where the greatest mind on the planet put all their resources into fixing this one disease and haven't figured out a fucking thing about it. Again, I know it's kind of a stretch, but you do need to be careful. Of course, this prong doesn't super have a good side because, you know, the good side's like, congratulations. You said some wild shit and they didn't start hating science because of it. So, like, if you're going from this perspective, it's kind of like high risk, no reward. But let's discuss how to write this well with the applications. Man, this is a lot faster than normal. Might just be the quantum hyper deflators. Anyways, let's take a moment and ask something very important. Is Technobabble right for your story? Because much like taking medications without asking your doctor if it's right for you, anal bleeding is a very real side effect that might happen. And see, because from my experience, not every story needs to have it. The anal bleeding or the Technobabble. So my rule of thumb is to compare it to real life. When in real life, when you ask a question to someone spout off technobabble? Well, there's really only 4 circumstances I can think of. First is when they think you understand what's happening. So like when you're talking to your friend about computers and they know nothing about them and all they add to the conversation is a sparkling smile and a few nods, yeah, you're using technobabble. Second is when people want you to leave them alone. So if you, for example, approach the nerd girl with all the swag in the world, toss your hair and ask her, "What's up, baby?" And so she explains exactly what she's doing, like she's giving a 500s level lecture on how to design the best Magic the Gathering deck. She just technobabbled you so that you would go away. Of course, because you're you, all that would happen was you nutting in your jeans. Because you're a bottom. Third is when they're showing off. Sometimes a smart person will say something like sodium chloride instead of salt, or nitrogen trihydride instead of ammonia. And this is literally meant to make themselves feel bigger than you. This is why when this happens, you call them a nerd and then give them a shoryuken directly in the genitalia. Or, if you really want to hurt them, tell them to not be an idiot and that these things have common names for a reason, and saying it the scientific way doesn't make them any smarter than anyone else, and in fact makes them dumber because they feel the need to flex instead of knowing that they're better than you. That'll really rock their confidence. And finally is when there isn't an easier way to say it. Because sometimes, despite all your best efforts, the technical way to say something is the only way that exists. Like talking about string theory. There's literally no way to talk about it without getting technical in a way that sounds like technobabble. So your first step should always be to consider which of these 4 your usage of technobabble really fits into. And then after that, go through the checklist that I do to decide if it's necessary. So step 1 is this something your audience needs to know, or are you showing off? Because hey, it's okay to show off, but you need to be honest with yourself. Especially showing off your massive, throbbing vocabulary, or your ability to make up words, but being honest with your intentions is key. Does anyone reading or listening really need to know the specifics? And if they do need to know, is there a better way to tell them? Like, for example, if it's going to be plot relevant later, how the FTL system works and why you can't use it all the time, do you need to technobabble it? No, just say what the limits are. So instead of, I quote, the system creates a quantum entanglement that allows the ship's wave replicator to vibrate the polarized monofilament in the engine housing at a rate that creates a space-time anomaly and transposes us somewhere else, but needs time to cool down. Because if the monofilament breaks, that would cause a quantum hypercollapse and radiate 10,000 Pecker gamma waves. Say, we need to be careful with the system because if we overuse it, it could break the FTL system and cause something akin to a supernova, but with about 1 million times the radiation, that would turn an entire solar system into radioactive ash. Or some shit. It says the same thing, but in a way that the audience doesn't need a degree in a fake field of science to understand. Also, it's a lot easier to write and you don't have to do a ton of research. Because, like, I feel like 40K does this sometimes too, but like there's a lot of settings that I can think of where instead of like explaining in detail how the thing works, they say, hey, here's this thing that does this. Sometimes if you misuse it, this happens. Boom. There you go. That's all your audience even gives a shit to know about unless they are like me or a science communicator. In that case, they're a content creator. We're going to find something to complain about it anyways. Okay. Step 2. Is the character you're having say it the right one? Because a lot of people will have, like, soldiers or scientists whose only role in the story is a technobabble say it. And in either case, this can come across extremely unrealistic. Because why are they the ones saying it, and to the audience they're saying it to? For some insight, let's use the soldier example. Most soldiers, even in sci-fi settings, are not going to use technobabble. Why? Because even soldiers given training in highly advanced technologies don't often get trained in the technical aspects of why it works. Just point, click and watch the cost of your actions in human lives. And even if they are educated in why exactly their laser rifle works, it's probably just the stuff that they need to know to use it safely and to maintain it. Added on to that, soldiers have to communicate things very quickly in a way that's easy to understand in a crisis. So, I mean, what's the fucking point of telling your laser rifleman how light works and what a photon compressor crystal does, when really all they need to know is that sometimes this photon compressor crystal will melt if you overuse the rifle, and also don't point at a fucking mirror, you goddamn idiot. And sure, you'll get military babble out of it, because it's the fucking military, but they're gonna talk in a way that even God's stupidest grunt fighting his silliest battles will understand. And a scientist in a highly technical field isn't like a Sheldon Cooper, which, I will say, that character has done more damage to the perception of the nerd and scientific community than incels. I dare you to fucking fight me on this. That thinks everyone is just as smart as them. No, instead, being a normalish human being, scientists will instantly recognize, often painfully recognize, that the people they're talking to are stupid and don't understand the basic concepts that allow a polarizing neogenic wave generator to function, let alone understand what the fuck they're talking about. So they'll either try to dumb it down or not even bother explaining and instead speak in actionable things. Like, you don't know how to fix this thing, just get me there and I can fix it. Because that's something your big, stupid grunt protagonist only knows rip, tear, easily actionable objectives and futuristic racial slurs will understand. Step 3, is this even in character? This is when you start thinking about the specific character you mean. Because if you decide that, yes, it is in character to Technobabble because they understand the thing and I want my readers to know that, then ask yourself something. How do they use Technobabble? This is when those reasons come back. Are they a braggart? Do they think this is common knowledge? Or is there not an easier way to say it? And this is also an opportunity to show off their voice. After the Technobabble, alter the Technobabble and how they use it in their sentence to fit into who they are as a person. Like, for example, if you have someone in a highly technical field because they trained with a master as an apprentice on how to repair something like starship engines, then maybe have the terminology and babble they use be more casual and based on slang or how things look or work. Or if they learn from a highly advanced college specifically for starship engineers, then maybe their vocabulary is a lot more formal and they use the actual technical and proper names of things. That makes the babble less you telling your audience what's happening and more your characters talking. And then finally, step 4. Is this a joke? Because if it isn't, then you need to make sure that this is actually something stupidly complex and not something that could be easily explained like a layman, because otherwise everyone's going to think that you, the character speaking, or both, is an asshole. And if it is a joke, it needs to be a lot more interesting and complex than English, please. Because that is the lamest possible joke you could make. It's incredibly overplayed because that's been the joke since Star Trek. I mean, okay, just off the top of my head, kind of, mostly. Let's say, like, you want to write a joke of a character using Technobabble. Set it up as a conversation between two characters that use two different kinds of Technobabble, like subfields of the same field of Technobabble, and have one of them say the Technobabble thing, have the other one act like disappointed, and then have a third character that's not involved in the conversation in any way ask, why are you disappointed? Don't you guys, like, know the same things? And then whip out more Technobabble from that second character of, like, well, you see, they know X, not Y. And then that first character is like, okay, speaking in, like, common parlance, we have, like, 3 degrees of separation. And then the joke is that, like, you know, scientists are extremely specific, and if they're not in the same exact field as someone else, they kind of clam up. Like, it's not the most, like, well-conceived joke, but for the top of my head, that's a good outline. Alright? Okay. Moving past that, you have all that information and also a terrible joke frame. So, how do you write convincing and good technobabble? What's the secret? I'm glad you asked because this is again in 4 steps. So, first, use real science. Learn some basic concepts, vocabulary, and use cases, and how scientists communicate these things both to each other and to us. Make sure you're familiar with who and what your story is going to interact with to make sure that you understand what you're saying or doing in the first place, which might help you to avoid technobabble or make it useful, not just a wall of text that's impossible to climb over. Or will help you to actually impress your savvy or technically skilled audience. You know, like for example, if you are making a show for like mass consumption, like something like space opera like Star Wars, don't fucking bother with technobabble. No one gives a shit. No one's gonna care. Just fucking look up like, high school science 101 and put that in your story, and like the lay audience will be like, oh, holy shit, they're so fucking smart. But like if you're writing a 5,000 page novel on like, like hyper realistic hard sci-fi space travel adventure, um in like 7-point font, you should look up like quantum mechanics and astrophysics and like understand exactly what you're writing, because those are two very different audiences. Like that second audience, if you're a tiny bit off, will crucify you and burn you at the stake. Like, also, like if you're writing like a children's book, don't put fucking technobabble in a children's book. Don't confuse the children. Um, just realized that's a fucking terrible thing to say during Pride Month. Anyways, second, use real words. Don't just make shit up. Look up how specific scientific terms are created and use that process for things like species and clades, or particles and forms of energy, or technology. Also, make sure that the words you want to use aren't already taken or commonly in use to save yourself both the time and the effort. And this will not only, of course, save time, make you smarter, and keep your technobabble believable, but it won't just be a thing that gets skipped. Some people might actually pick out real words or have a science background and figure out vaguely what you mean, which can be really awesome for your story to get picked up as a good platform for science communication. Also, it would be really cool for science communicators to be able to find more stories that actually do science well. Third, be consistent. Don't switch up your terms. Sure, different characters can call them different things or have more or less levels of babble, but make sure that the actual technical terms stay the same unless it's an intentional point of contention. This will help you keep your audience invested because it shows you give a shit and is a world you want to share, and will also save you a lot of time because you don't have to re-explain shit. A good like simple example would be like astronaut versus cosmonaut, because those both have like similar beginnings. Like Cosmo is like out, it's space. Astro is like star. Like they both mean space, but there's slight differences in what it means. Like astro implies stars, cosmo implies vastness, and not means explorer. They're both I think astro is Latin, cosmo is Greek, and so that has its own implications, and also because of our own history, we understand that cosmonaut is Russian, astronaut is American. So if someone calls themselves an astronaut and someone else calls themselves a cosmonaut, you can kind of see where their like historic like affiliations lie, and that can, you can introduce stuff like that, and that can massively affect and change your story. But at its core, those are both kind of the same thing. And if you explain, like, these are two terms used by different groups of people for the same thing, then, you can get away with that. But overall, don't fuck around with your terms. Okay. And with that, fourth, make sure you use your genre appropriate terms and don't do info dumps. Basically, just make sure that your language isn't out of place for the genre, and make sure that your terminology and technology is reflective of the actual time and place of your story. You also don't have to explain how everything works. I mean, sure, there's people who's going to want to know how these things work, but it's not necessary to spell it out. It'll just slow down your story and be unnecessary technobabble that could make you look stupid. So just mold your story's usage of it to what's appropriate and let us over-explainers dig deeper. And with that, let's wrap up the show. What? What do you expect? This is a shorter episode that isn't too deep and it's already late. Do you really want to hear me say, I can take it or leave it with another trope? After so many endings like that. Anyways, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast feed, like it, leave a review, whatever else it is you can do on your platform of choice. Send me an email at waytappods@gmail.com with questions, concerns, opinions, compliments, insults, actuallys, more technobabble than you can shove your dick in, what the fuck that means, the best uses of technobabble you've ever seen, and anything else you want to tell me. Also follow me on Twitter at waytat_pods. I have abandoned Mastodon because Mastodon is kind of shitty. Remember to check out my other podcast, Waytat, where I talk about topics that are usually a bit deeper, like this week's was really fucking long. This is mostly why this is late. But, alright. Have a good night. Have fun. Keep writing. And remember, tip your hyperpulse gamma cell engineers. They do not get paid enough. This has been Why You're Talking About This Nerd, and I've been your host, William. Good night.